you just said, but thank you also to the Fire Brigades Union for all its support over a long time. And this truck here has toured the whole country. We addressed 10,000 people in Liverpool from this truck. We were at the Durham Miners' Gala. We've been at so many places. This truck goes where it's at. And while we're on that, can we also thank the Fire Brigades Union and all the other emergency services, because they're the ones that we rely on. They're the ones who get condemned when they demand justice. They're the ones that get thanked when they pull us out of fires and pull us out of floods and pull us out of car accidents. They are a daily reminder of the kind of society we want to live in, where we value our public service workers and don't condemn them to wage freezes and cuts and privatisation. Thank you, firefighters, ambulance workers, police, and so many other emergency services for all that you do. And thanks also to the Labour parties in Milton Keynes and Buckingham and many other parts who've nominated in this leadership contest. And when we came for that inaugural meeting for the local election campaign at the Ridgeway Centre, 600 members were there. They put their all into carrying a good, strong Labour message all through this city. And I tell you what, this leadership campaign is about leadership of the party, yes, but it's also about our campaigning abilities to offer people something different, something alternative, a society that cares for all, not nourishes the wealth of the few. And that's why we're going to gain seats here in Milton Keynes in the general election. And during the campaign, we've been addressing rallies and meetings all over the country. This is the 20th we've done so far. And there's a lot more to go, probably about another 40 to go. All over the country, we're getting a big turnout of people. Some are party members, some are party supporters, some come because they're interested in politics for the first time, because they recognise that since a year ago, we are no longer the Me Tooism of politics. On one side, they want to cut public expenditure. On one side, they want to reduce the role of the public services in provision of everything. On one side, they want to privatise a great deal. On one side, they want to reduce corporate taxation. On one side, they want to reduce the tax burden, as they call it, for the very wealthiest. We are now offering something very, very different. A year ago, I'm sad to say, that in Parliament, the official Labour position was to abstain on the welfare reform bill and the £12 billion that was going to take from the poorest and most vulnerable in our society. No more is that the position. We want to defend and support those who are most vulnerable within our society. And on the wider economic strategy, as my good friend John McDonnell has pointed out, that austerity is a political choice, not an economic necessity. They took that political choice. We take a very different choice altogether. But then you look at the levels of cuts and inequality that are present in modern Britain, and you think, is this right? Is it necessary? Why do we constantly listen to a refrain that says this generation is relatively well off? That's the middle-aged and older generation that largely run politics in this country, but they're very sorry that the next generation is not going to have the free university education, is not going to have the pensions, is not going to have the level of public services that the rest of us have. And I ask myself the question, why are we even getting into that debate? Surely a society that comes together, that cares for all and everybody, would absolutely see as a priority to make sure that all the scientific and technical advances are made, lead to a greater distribution of wealth, a fairer distribution of wealth, and that the next generation would be better off than this generation. so what we're offering is a politics of hope, a politics of investment, a politics of the kind of society in which we want to live. And people say, well, that's all very well. Didn't work in the past, it won't work in the future. Those people that met during the dire days of the 1920s after the general strike, those people that met in the depths of the depression of the 1930s, talked and thought and fought for a different kind of society and a different kind of world. And you know what? 10 and 20 years later, we had a national health service free at the point of use. And it's not just the delivery of a service that's involved there. There's something very, very fundamental about it. The National Health Service, free at the point of use, healthcare as a human right for everybody in this country. That was the most amazing achievement of almost any government in modern British history. But as Diane said, our NHS might be protected with its name, and every politician that now speaks say they love the NHS and it's safe in their hands. And then you talk to anyone working in the NHS, the pain in their eyes and their voice when they know there's insufficient doctors at an A&E department overnight, when they know there's insufficient nurses on a ward dealing with often very dependent elderly people, when they know there are home care workers and home visiting nurses who cannot cope with the workload they've got and the stress and pressure that they're going through. Then at the same time, they're told that two things must happen. One is that the private finance initiative debt incurred by almost every hospital is the first priority of payment. So we pay out to the banks that have done very well out of the NHS ever since PFI came in, and we carry on doing it. I think things should change in that department. And then we're also told that the efficiency of the NHS will improve with greater levels of privatisation. Well, the Health and Social Care Act required 49% of all NHS services to go out to the private sector. Large profits being made on that. Sorry, I want our money to be spent on our NHS, on our NHS employees, and I want those services directly in-house, provided by the NHS. But the NHS has a huge problems and issues to deal with. I was very pleased that Diane mentioned mental health in her speech. I feel very passionately and very strongly about this. There's a lot of us here today in this square, and it's a beautiful bright sunshine, and we're all together, we support each other. During our lifetime, a quarter of us are going to go through a crisis of stress, a crisis of isolation, a crisis in which we're not quite sure where to turn to and who to turn to. Some of us will get through it with the love and support of our partners, our families and our friends, and we'll get through. Others will go to mental health services and get support, and hopefully will get through. Others won't, because of the mindset of too many in our society that prefers to make jokes about stress and mental health rather than saying it's something that could happen to all of us, and that in everybody there has to be support and care for them. So it's our job as a movement, as a community, to reach out to people and support them. But it's also our job as a community to make sure that there is real parity of esteem within our NHS, that the mental health services are properly funded, and that young people going through stress don't feel that the macho culture means it's impossible for them to seek the help that they need. Reach out to everybody. Make sure everybody is supported. Surely It's those principles that gave us an NHS in the first place. It's those principles we want to bring forward to the wider society in which we live. And then, when people say, well, that's all very well what you're doing there, that's all going to cost a lot of money. Yes, health does cost a lot of money. Yes, it's necessary. And yes, we have to be prepared to spend and invest that money in the NHS. But you also have to say, well, in paying for it, you've got to make sure that there is a real contribution made by everybody in this. John McDonnell has put forward proposals for an expanding economy and a more efficient way of doing things. Firstly, if you want everyone to pay their fair share of taxes, and you don't want people pushing their money over to the Cayman Islands or somewhere else rather than paying taxes here, and you have newspapers saying, well, somebody is so rich and doing so well, they can no longer afford to live in Britain because they can't afford to pay the taxes, it seems a bit of a misnomer to me. Surely, if you want to collect taxes, you don't cut HMRC's staff, instead you invest in them. You don't impose a wage freeze on all those members of the PCS and other unions working in that. And in this Brexit era, we have some decisions to make on the direction our economy goes. There are those on the right in the Tory party who would say, well, yes, the way forward is this. We'll develop an offshore service economy on the fringes of Europe. We will attract any amount of funny money in, and any amount of funny money can go out someplace else, and we'll attract them in by lowering corporate taxation, lowering taxation for the very wealthiest, and as a result, the cuts will take place in every other area of public service. Do we want to allow this country to become the bargain basement offshore island of Europe, or are we going to be an expanding economy with a high level of public services and an attitude to the economy that is inclusive of all within our society? And so that requires a thought process in economic thinking, which is that nobody and no community should be left behind. So we invest. John has proposed a national investment bank of £500 billion to improve infrastructure investment across all parts of the UK. Why is it that London and parts of the South East get 22 times as much investment as the North East and North West? It's not right and it's not fair. The investment should be spread evenly across the whole country. In that infrastructure, but also in those services that follow from it, but also in investment in high-tech industries, green energy jobs, and a developing sustainable economy. For too long, we've encouraged people to do research, encouraged people to invent, encouraged people to develop new products and new ideas, and then a short-sighted, high-profit-taking banking system is not interested in them, even when we bail them out with £300 billion of quantitative easing, and those inventions go somewhere else and are manufactured somewhere else. A national investment bank investing in productive industries will provide jobs, opportunity, good quality training for everybody leaving school, leaving apprenticeships or leaving university. It's about the approach you take to society. And that is what fundamentally the message we're putting forward is about. We live in a society that is deeply unequal and getting more unequal. The proportion of national income that goes on wages as a proportion of the total is falling. That goes on dividends and high salaries is increasing. The inequality is rising all the time. The underfunding of public services makes that inequality even worse. If you walk around any railway station at night, walk around any major park in any big city in this country at night, what do you find? Desperate, homeless people trying to find some place to put their head safely for the night. They all have different stories. They all have stories of where they've been declared intentionally homeless. They've suffered family breakup. They've suffered evictions. They've suffered ill health. They've suffered all kinds of things. And they're all individual, often tragic and very sad stories. But what is it about modern Britain that we praise the fact that there are food banks that 1 million people use, but we have a government that's not prepared to invest in the services, which would mean we wouldn't need food banks and we wouldn't allow people to be living homeless and living in the desperation that so many of them do. It's about the attitude that we take. The attitude we take to people, their hopes and their aspirations. Why is it that those with disabilities tend to earn less, often be discriminated against, and many put through the indignities, frankly, of the capability of work assessment tests? Let's change our attitude on so many of these things and value everybody within our society. Have a thought process that is inclusive to all. That surely is what we're about. So in this campaign, we've put forward 10 points. I'm not going to go through them all because you don't want to be here till sunset. But I want to say this. Employment issues, thank you very much, it's okay. Employment issues are absolutely crucial. And we've launched Workplace 2020. Workplace 2020 is about campaigning for decent rights at work and opportunities at work for everybody. And it's been launched with the support of the affiliated unions, the party, and many others. We're taking evidence from unions, yes, from self-employed workers, from employers and many others about what the world of work should look like. We haven't come to all the conclusions on it yet, but I say we start with this. The indignity of 0 hours contracts, where people wait for the phone to ring, hoping they might get a few hours work. They don't get it, so they end up trying to claim benefits for that week. There's then confusion. They often then end up being sanctioned. And they don't get any support or payment while they're waiting, often for hours or days, in the possibility of getting a bit of work. 18 countries across Europe have outlawed 0 hours contracts. Let's outlaw them here. And the degree of insecurity at work, where agencies tend to employ people, thus avoiding employment rights, that employment tribunals are allowed to charge costs and fees to anyone taking a case there, thus a deterrent to it. Let's do a couple of things here. First of all, let's abolish employment tribunal fees and give everybody access to the justice they should have and should deserve. And deal with the issue of contracted out and agency working. Because what is happening in this sort of free market regulation-free idea is there's grotesque levels of exploitation going on. My good friend Dennis Skinner, MP for Bolsover, who's strongly supporting our campaign, used to work in Shirebrook Colliery in Nottinghamshire. When he worked there, everyone was employed on the same conditions. They were all members of the union. There was an efficient management structure. There was a strong sense of the mining community all around. And there weren't arguments between people because of their ethnic background or because of their nationality. They worked together because they were miners working together who absolutely depended on each other for their very own survival and safety. There was that strength of community. The Tories came along in 1979, won that election by promising £10 notes for a fiver to everybody, and proceeded to destroy manufacturing industry in Britain and take a sledgehammer to the mining industry. All these years later, much the spirit is there in many of those communities, but Shirebrook is something different. It's now a warehouse run by Sport Direct, where even an all-party select committee of the House of Commons described the conditions as appalling and disgraceful, where ambulances are frequently called to deal with ill health. Fire tenders are called because of danger in that place. The vast majority of people in it are on 0 hours contract, where the aggregate of their average weekly wage doesn't get anywhere near to even a national minimum wage. dreadful levels of exploitation, dangerous working conditions, and a miasma of subcontracting and agency culture for the main company to try and evade and avoid the responsibility. I hope the work that's been done by Unite and other unions in exposing that will mean that even in opposition, we'll be able to force this government to bring in proper regulations to ensure decent, safe and fair working conditions in those places. And then you look at other jobs that have been lost, such as in PHS, where Philip Green works so hard during the 3 days a week that he's in Britain. He has to go to Monaco for the weekend to recover. And that's, of course, where his tax income goes as well. Well, is it really right that we should have somebody who was even appointed a government minister, who is a tax exile, who buys a company like BHS, destroys and runs the whole thing down, leaves the pension fund in a desperately parlous state, and hundreds of people without work, and hundreds of stores closed? Where was government intervention to protect those jobs and make that company be properly run? Where was government intervention to ensure protection of those workers? So it is about employment rights, and it is about justice that is so important within our society. Housing is a massive issue. Different issues in different parts of Britain. Too many people living in unregulated, private rented sector places. Some of them well run, some of them very badly run, some of them in need of repair. But what does it say to children growing up in a private rented sector flat that they might have to leave after 6 months, might have to leave that school and go to another school because their council can't find anywhere for them within that borough or that community? So we end up with the movement of the homeless and the dangerously housed from one part of the country to another. Cathy Come Home was made many years ago to expose what was going on in the private rented sector then. We can and we are seeing the equivalent of Cathy Come Home now in modern Britain. And the effect on the health of those children and families of all that is very, very serious. This government's response is what? To bring in a Housing Act which says to local authorities, if you've got valuable properties that happen to be occupied by council tenants, at the very point they move out because of death or they want to move somewhere else perfectly voluntarily, the council is then forced to sell it, thus reducing the level of available stock, forcing more people into the private rented sector with very high rents, and reducing the housing options and opportunities for all. And those that want to buy into the private market on starter homes are told that in London £400,000 is a reasonable price for a starter home. I don't know anybody that could afford as a starter home to pay £400,000. I don't know what world this government lives in when it says that kind of thing. So our proposals have the virtuous circle about them. We want to build 500,000 council homes during the first term of a Labour government. And we don't want those homes to be market rented or pay to stay. We want them to be lifetime secure homes and tenancies for those people that live in them. That achieves a lot of things. Gives people security of tenure, gives people security of their homes, creates jobs in the building industry, creates jobs all the way down the supply chain, and allows the innovation of many of our municipal architects and some of our very fine private sector architect companies to build sustainable homes to passive house standards. So energy costs go down, the environment is protected as a result, and you get better housing as a result of that. It's an attitude of mind that we need to see change. An attitude of mind that supports people in the quality of housing in which they live. This isn't particularly revolutionary. Other countries do it already. But it's our obsession with the market solving everything rather than the public and community dealing with the problems we all face as a public and a community. It's a mindset we need to have changed. When we talk of education, we need to think through what it's about. Preschool education is very, very important. We want to expand the access to preschool opportunities for every child beyond the 15 hours a week. We want all children to be able to socialise together in a preschool environment because those early years are so important. They bring parents together, they bring the children together, they bring them up in an atmosphere of learning, playing together and understanding. We don't want nursery places rationed either by poverty or the ability to pay for very expensive places. Surely we want all our children to have those preschool opportunities. And then you go into the school years and the importance of having class sizes that remain at 30 or less, not the super classes we're now seeing, and the cuts in school budgets for the first time in 30 years in this country that are now taking place. And the routine attack on the teaching profession and upon local education authorities. I simply say this: if we make, as the stories want to do, made every school into an academy, every new school a free school, you destroy the national bargaining arrangements for teachers, so you end up in a free-for-all with either very high pay for some people, much lower pay for others, much greater job insecurity, and you end up with a sort of market economy in education. You also end up with every school in competition with the school down the road. Every school down the road being suspicious of the next school down the road. Honest to goodness, what is wrong with all of us that we can't see the value of a local education authority bringing together that family of schools, that family of education opportunity, and all the add-on advantages that go with it? Surely these things are very, very important. But it's also about how we deal with the issues, the life, the opportunities of culture for all of us. Because it was a Labour government in the 1960s, Jenny Lee, the Minister for the Arts, the first one appointed, who established the Arts Council, the Open University based here in Milton Keynes. Because it was a Labour principle that in all of us there is creativity. In all of us there ought to be the opportunity to study, whether we went to a good school or not, whether we went to university or not, but to undertake study through the Open University or adult education. Bring back proper funding for adult education. But also properly fund the arts budget so that music, theatre and so on doesn't become the thing that only those that can afford to can enjoy, something that we can all enjoy. There is a creativity and a spirit in all of us. There is a thirst for music in so many young people who don't get those opportunities. And I'm very determined that our cultural policies will reflect all of that. So it's about our approach to the world and our approach to the environment. Last year I was very proud to go on behalf of our party to the Climate Change Conference in Paris. Amazing experience. Talking to people from all over the world about how they were dealing with issues of climate change, issues of environmental change, and issues of pollution. We have to be much more aware, much more active, and much more determined on all of this. That means an attitude of mind which is about protecting the natural world and the ecosystems that go with it, that is about sustainability in buildings, that is about the way we deal with air pollution and water pollution. And you know what? You can't do it on your own. If we pump up into the air foul effluents and gases, they go somewhere else. They land somewhere else. They pollute somebody else. If somebody else pumps raw sewage into the sea, it flows somewhere else and lands on our beaches. You have to do it internationally. And I want a Labour government that will sign up to all of those international conventions. But also look at it on a trade put in the air, what we put into the products we make. Good. I welcome and support all of that. We import, however, a very large number of products that are often made in a very environmentally unsustainable way. In effect, it can be that our regulations end up with us exporting pollution to somebody else, so that we buy clothes that are made in a dangerous place that are themselves used to pollute rivers somewhere else. And this is difficult, I know, but if we're serious about the global environment as well as our own environment, we have to negotiate with all our trade agreements human rights clauses as well as environmental protection clauses, so that we all play our part in these kind of issues. So there's so much on offer that we have to be doing. But it's about communities and what we do. A community that comes together achieves a lot. If a community, however, decides that the shortage of school places, the waiting list at the doctor's surgery, the problems in the local hospital, can all be blamed on the black family living next door, or be blamed on a Lithuanian migrant who happens to be working and living next door to you. Once a community turns in on itself and blames everybody else for the problems and the shortages, do you know what happens? Not one school gets built, not one doctor gets trained, not one teacher gets employed, not one hospital gets improved. All you do is descend into a horrible vortex of a blame culture. It's communities doing things together that achieve the most. And that's why the unpleasant events that have taken place with hate crime across this country since the vote in the European referendum can best be dealt with by all of us coming together and saying we are a community together, we want to achieve things for everybody together. And so it's politics that brings about that change, and it's how political change comes about. We lost the last general election. We were all very sad and very angry about that. And we also knew what was coming. What came straight after the election was, after the 2010 election, was an emergency budget which took a large amount of resources out of the public sector, and it started attacking the principles of the welfare state. The 2015 election brought much of the same response. We also had 5 years of being told that the banking crisis of 2008 was caused by, allegedly, too much public expenditure, as though firefighters, police officers, nurses, care workers, teachers, doctors, all those people were so greedy that they crashed the economy. I beg to differ. I think it was much more to do with bankers, unregulated bankers, who damaged our economy at that time. But unfortunately, our response as a party was not strong enough between those elections or during the campaign itself. To win an election, you have to offer something very, very different. If we go into an election offering good things, which we did, but underlying it was saying we're going to continue the public sector pay freeze, we are going to continue making cuts in public expenditure, we are going to continue underfunding our local government, it's not a particularly attractive proposition. But if instead we say, look, the issues that face modern Britain are serious, the need for investment, the need to tackle the appalling levels of inequality, and the need to give hope, opportunities for everybody in our society, particularly for the young in our society, then I think we begin to get a different political response. And it can't have escaped the notice, or it may have done, of some of our media and some of our people that think very deeply about these things, that the response has been that 300,000 people have joined the Labour Party in the last year. And they've joined for a reason, because they want things in society to be rather different and differently run. And so this campaign is, of course, at one level, a campaign for the election of the leader of the Labour Party. But it's actually about what we do as a party and as a movement, and how we challenge the narrative that the Tories are imposing on this country. How we enthuse, excite and mobilise people to win things in their own community and ultimately win things for all communities. And that is exactly what is happening in the Labour Party at the present time. And to those people that say, well, we don't like this, the way things are going, and therefore we're not prepared to play ball, I simply say to them, come September the 24th, this election campaign will be over. Come September the 25th, get on board, join in, and take the fight to the Tories. Take the fight to the Tories and the kind of society they are bequeathing to modern Britain. Give hope and opportunities to young people not to be exploited with low wages, exploitative, poor quality apprenticeships, of which some of them are. Make sure every young person gets the chance of a decent apprenticeship. And university education should be something everyone should want to do if they're able to do it, should be able to aspire to do it if that's what they want to do. And we all benefit from it, because a good qualified engineer is good for all of us. But don't saddle the next generation with £50,000 worth of debt for getting themselves trained and educated. So it is about our message, it is about our community and our society. The simple one is this: come together, we achieve things. Come together, we are strong. Divided, we are very weak. This campaign has shown just how strong we are, just how united we are, and just how determined we are to say at the end of it, no one and no community and no region in modern Britain should be left behind. We shouldn't have post-industrial wastelands without proper services and support, any more than we should have homeless people in the major cities and parks of this country. Create a society, a community, an idea, a value that we can all be proud of. That gives us real hope for the future, and that is what is so exciting about the political times in which we live. Thank you so much for coming today.